the Learning and Development Podcast, presented by 360 Learning. Hello listener, and welcome to the Learning and Development Podcast. I'm David James, and today I'm speaking with Tom Kupetis and Brandon Dickens about how AI is exposing L&D's current operating model as unfit for purpose and what we need to consider instead. Brandon, welcome to the Learning and Development Podcast, and Tom, welcome back.
Thanks, David. Good to be here.
Yeah, great to be back. Always a pleasure to chat with you, David.
Let's not beat about the bush. We'll get straight in with the hard question then, because AI is forcing organizations to rethink how work gets done and how departments run. So, as I mentioned in the intro, in what ways is this exposing L&D's current operating model as no longer fit for purpose?
Well, first of all, let me just preface the answer by a prelude of saying, what a unique concept to have a podcast talking about AI and L&D. That's happened in minutes, right? No, but there's a point to that, which is that the space is just overwhelmed with points of view, perspectives, information, data, new tools, new tech, new approaches, new methods. And I think it's frankly overwhelming for L&D organizations. And I'll start with my waxing poetic and then give Brandon, who's the brains of the operation, time to really give you a more proper answer. But what I see happening in terms of how departments are running right now is a real air of uncertainty. Oftentimes, and I've said this for decades now, L&D functions, for whatever reason, tend to gravitate towards technology first. And I see that happening yet again. It most recently happened with the skills craze, right? Everyone's like, oh, we've got to get a skills platform. We've got to go license a taxonomy. We need stuff, right? Somehow stuff equates to progress and advancement, but oftentimes that's not the case. The challenge in the AI world is there is an overwhelming paradox of choice in terms of actions. And when some of the things are truly groundbreaking, exciting opportunities that are harnessing the power of the large language model, and some of it is just the same old tool with a different wrapper around it and everything in between. And that's exacerbated by the fact that the technology itself, the native technology of large language model, artificial intelligence, is advancing so rapidly. I don't know how any tool provider or technology company is going to attempt to keep up. And so that's not a direct answer, but it's the foundational elements that are causing the concern and confusion within the L&D function.
Yeah, and I agree with all that. And I mean, just to dive in on a couple of things. I mean, I think one big piece of disruption here that we haven't seen before is that AI is sort of striking at a core capability of L&D that they built up over time, which is content production, the management of content production, the management of static courses, all that kind of stuff. And, AI is making it, I mean, today, if you re-engineer processes, the time required to create a static course is, under a day. It's measured in hours. Right. So all that organizational overhead around creating static content, it's not going to need to be there. On the other hand, there's in all of the kind of analyst reports, people talk about the kind of C-suite's lack of faith in the value that they're getting from A&D because we can't measure. And I think AI changes that picture pretty dramatically as well. And when you put those two things together, you're talking about a whole new world that's pretty hard to imagine. And if you couple that with the silo collapse we're seeing starting now, and that's just going to rapidly expand as AI allows a single person to do several job roles, like we're seeing probably most pointedly in the kind of product manager role in tech, right? That role is now 3 or 4 roles historically rolled into one, and everyone's scratching their head about what to do. That's going to continue. So I think L&D's knowledge of what the business is going to be is beyond shaky. No one knows what it's going to be. So I think you put all those things together and you're just looking at something that's a level of disruption we've never seen before.
And we've seen disruption previously. I was in running L&D at Disney during the financial crash of the late 2000s. We lived through COVID-19, and things largely reverted back to old ways. We can, pretty much safely say across the board as far as learning and development is concerned. So what makes this moment different?
I can take a swing at that. And then if you want to jump in, Tom, I think that if you look at how, and I'm going to zoom kind of a little bit cosmic here for a second. If you look at how our educational system was what came to be, right? It really, almost every decision we made was based on one constraint, which was the scarcity of expertise. For millennia, we had apprenticeship models. Those worked really well. We knew they worked really well. But when we had, 1 million citizens, we had to instruct. Obviously, we can't put an expert with every individual. And that led to classrooms, that led to static courseware, that led to curricula, right? Like all of our organizing principles in L&D come from that. What Gen AI is doing, and I don't know that people have fully understood this yet, at least not a lot of people, it's putting expertise on tap, basically. And so that core constraint that we built everything around is gone. And when that goes, the level of change you're going to see is not the same as, oh, we have Web 3.0 now, or even, wow, we have, online training now. It's just much more foundational, and it challenges a lot more of how we've decided to go about the job of training people.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And that's going to have reverberating effects. There's 2 points I would make in addition to what Brandon said to reinforce that message. The other construct that's always sort of been there, and I'm saying this a bit tongue in cheek, but there's always been this, learning, that's just learning. Anybody can do learning. Like, I'm an expert in topic XYZ. I can build the best training ever. And then you get what I call the death by the 8-point PowerPoint font, right? It's just regurgitating all the knowledge they know. Well, now in L&D, people will get their hands on that and say, this isn't good instructional design, and nobody's going to learn from this. And they weren't wrong. They're absolutely correct. But now what's happening is you're putting the power of these large language models in the hands of people that may or may not be subject matter experts, and they're able to crank out stuff on their own, whether it's good, whether it's bad, whether it's accurate, whether people will learn from it, more importantly, whether people will take it and apply it on the job and change performance. Again, total unknown and question mark, but the ability to do it as rapidly as you can. And you've heard countless people talk about, I just created a course in 5 minutes. Okay, well, you created something in 5 minutes. Is it a course? Is it a communications document? Is it a set of questions? Point being, that constraint of taking the time, sitting down in front of your laptop, opening up PowerPoint, writing that stuff is gone. And now you just feed in source documentation and you get something back. So that's a dynamic that L&D's never dealt with before. On a more sophisticated level, Brandon was mentioning about the apprenticeship model being the basis for how we learn, going back to ancient Greece, and then evolve to the current classroom. We're seeing that play out. So St. Charles, as you know, David, does a lot of work in the professional services world, the big strategy firms, the big accounting firms, where they in particular have embraced an apprenticeship model for hundreds of years in terms of developing their people, particularly at the lower levels, the classic professional services pyramid. And we're having a lot of conversations with client about how that pyramid is going to change into more of a diamond shape, right? Because they're not going to need as many recruits right out of school. And the jobs that those people are going to be doing, to Brandon's earlier point about product management, they're going to be more managing the technology and people and apps through a process. And what we see there from an apprenticeship is a big gap, right? The particular big gap we've identified in the last few weeks and months is around professional judgment, right? Because when you do those menial, basic foundational tasks, they might seem repetitive and menial, but you're actually learning professional judgment through that process and being shoulder to shoulder with someone who's been there and done that before. So now that's gone. And particularly in those firms, that creates a level of risk, right? So if you're signing off on if you're auditing a publicly traded organization and the partner has to sign audit work papers, but isn't confident that the teams that are doing the heavy lifting have the professional judgment to make good decisions, how do you get around that? And so we've got, I won't reveal the answer to that question, but we've got a solution to that. And surprise, AI is front and center in that solution to become, in some ways, the apprentice, right? So it's kind of an existential thing I have trouble getting my head around, but you get the point.
Yeah, absolutely. It always, the way that you both framed this, it's almost as if we might look back on the last 30, 40, 50 years as a blip. We've acted a certain way because, to your point, Brandon, because of scale and because of limited resources and perhaps cruder technology. That scale became different versions of one size fits all. But the apprenticeship model, which worked because it was focused on the work, it provided very personalized and adaptive guidance and support in service of the work. Back then, it might have been done one-to-one, person-to-person, but an apprenticeship model using more advanced tools, it's almost reverting back to what worked for thousands of years before. Am I interpreting that right, or too simplistically?
That is 100% my take. I mean, I quickly became convinced that I saw the dark ages lifting from us when we started first experimenting, 3.5, 4 years ago with this technology. I do think it's going to be a blip. And I do think it's going to be remembered as a sort of dark age. I mean, we did the best we could. We certainly lifted a lot of people up, in the process. It was the best we could do. It was not nearly as good as we can do today. So I definitely see that.
Well, and the last thing on the apprenticeship model is, if you think about, if anyone's ever hired a bad carpenter to come do work for it, that person learned from someone else, right? They were in that apprentice program at some point. There are no bad carpenters teaching other carpenters with AI when you think about the power of it and the amount of knowledge it can harness and the speed at which it's advancing in terms of its ability to process and synthesize data. And so not only is that apprenticeship model now available at scale and will be available on a one-to-one basis, but the level of, I'll use the word genius for lack of a better term, that is going to be afforded to people it's almost incomprehensible.
And so I suppose that makes a mockery then of the responses that we're seeing of organizations looking to centralize L&D to drive efficiency and cost savings because AI helps to do things faster and cheaper. But to say that that's foolhardy is an understatement, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, we're going to develop the best static courseware we've ever developed in the history of L&D right as it becomes completely obsolete. So if you're indexing your L&D strategy around producing content cheaper and faster, that speed and cost is going to approach zero at some point, and you're not going to be needed anymore. So, I mean, I definitely think that is an understatement. I mean, I think it's a fatal decision, frankly, at this point. I think the big challenge for organizations is that their budgets aren't changing, right? L&D's budget is L&D's budget, and they've got to keep running today, but somehow they have to build a parallel stream within that budget that's moving towards the future. And I think a lot of people, a lot of departments, a lot of learning leaders that I talk to are just stuck. They don't know how to navigate that particular divide. And so they're doing what's getting them kudos, which is great. You produced 30 more hours of content, and what it did, nobody knows. But, they're not really, I don't think, coming to grips with how important that second stream is to get going.
Yeah. And the conversation we've been having with clients around being more efficient and reducing your cost, it's the cost of the traditional legacy operation. The very next words out of our mouth are, if you're going to do that, you have to go get executive buy-in that you're not going to give that savings back to the business, that you're going to reinvest it in what the future of this organization needs to be. And honestly, even if you were to drastically reduce costs, which many organizations have done, and successfully, because there's always a lot of waste, even that reinvestment may not be enough to completely get you where you need to go. But without it, to Brandon's point, it's like anything else. I harken back to when e-learning was invented back in the Stone Ages when I was a young pup. And, people are like, wow, this is so expensive to build an hour of this stuff. And the argument was, yeah, but you can touch thousands of people, right at their desk when before you'd have to get them to a classroom. I used to build tools that were Excel-based that had these fancy ROI models, right? Now, it's like that's a whole new game. And thinking about how that reinvestment takes shape is important. So yes, being efficient and saving money, that's a drumbeat and a pulse that will continue to beat. But my message to L&D leadership is make the case to turn around and reinvest that in yourselves to transform as fast as possible.
So thinking about that reinvestment in ourselves as L&D, how do you see roles needing to change as AI reshapes the business?
Well, I would talk about, and Brandon, I think we could agree, let's just take the concept, and this is very hot topic right now, is this concept of enterprise-wide AI adoption, AI fluence, right? Where people are saying, we need to get tens or hundreds of thousands of people across the globe in a Fortune 500, Fortune 100 company up to a baseline level of knowledge of AI. And what they really mean is they don't want knowledge. They want knowledge, usage, application in the context of the role that they do today. And we're already seeing a classic breakdown of that model. And Brandon, I don't know if you want to expand on that or you want me to, but we've got a very strong point of view around this that we're pretty passionate about that directly speaks to the question.
Yeah, I mean, the kind of the core of that is that, we're looking at the big challenge, and the challenge I think that L&D hasn't grappled with enough is really kind of the abstraction transfer problem. That people do not transfer any level of abstraction very well back to their jobs. And I think that goes to one set of roles that are going to change pretty dramatically, and that's the role of facilitation. When you're trying to get a team to really adopt AI and champion it and figure out how to make the most of it, you have to create that aha moment where they see it in their context, they can feel it, they have a thing they're going to go back and use and brag about and feel great about. And the only way you create that moment is with something like action learning, or kind of learn by doing approaches. What we're seeing in the facilitation role needed there, and I think it's going to be in a lot of other places as well. You need something a lot more like a business consultant, somebody who can sit down with a classroom and really understand what workflows are you trying to accomplish here? What tools do you have available to you? Okay, how do we break that task down and think about how to create an AI workflow around it? You have to actually get them doing that in the moment. You can't just talk about it. So I think that's one central change is we're going to have, I think, less of a view of a facilitator as a person who stands up and reads slides, and a lot more of an idea of a facilitator who is rolling up their sleeves, going shoulder to shoulder with folks, and really, again, implementing that more apprenticeship-like model to what they're doing.
Yeah, in the context of the role that the person performs so that they can go back to their job after the learning occurs and not only apply that thing they did in the classroom that's directly relevant, but what we've seen and proven is it opens and frees their mind to think about, they can pattern match then what they experience with AI in that particular task, role, or process to other tasks, roles, and processes. And now you've got this exponential thing. And the beauty of it is you can actually measure that, right? So you can actually say at 30, 60, 90, 180 days after people have gone through this, what we're calling praxis lab concept, praxis being the ancient Greek philosophy of learning by doing, that they're actually advancing the application and use of AI towards changing the way work happens, which is what everybody ultimately wants. But what do we see? The vast majority of L&D organizations are putting out curriculum, right? Everybody take this e-learning course on good prompt writing. Well, the problem is those are written generically. Every company has a specific tool set that they've adopted. The prompts don't work the same. By the way, they've put various guardrails around those tools, depending on the organization, the industry they're in, their level of compliance, their approach towards risk, their approach towards data, privacy, data security. So, all those specificity factors are limiting. And so putting out generic courses, well, again, you can point to consumption data and say, yeah, we've trained 78% of the organization on basic AI prompting and fluency skills. If you're not moving the needle and you can't point to it, we're back to that irrelevant conversation.
Totally. And I mean, kind of zooming out from that more specific case, if you buy the premise that, static content is not going to be the game anymore, and you buy the premise that we don't measure very well today, but we're going to be able to measure really well in the future, that tells you a lot about what the L&D department of the future is going to look like. It's going to be a lot more focused on deep intimacy with the business. It's going to have a lot more focus on rigorous learning science, which we've not been serious about, I think, across the industry. And it's going to be a lot more about data analytics than it is today, because we're going to be able to measure, we're going to be able to prove ROI and so forth. So you're going to see roles come into play that are focused around those things. And I think, and I hope that's going to drive the conversation away from cost and for the first time into the arena of value, which is, really how we should be looking at AI is, we can get a 2 sigma improvement in the performance of our population. We know that. That's what one-on-one direct apprenticeship does. You get a 2 sigma improvement. Like, apply that to sales, right? What does a 2 sigma change in, closure rates mean for an organization? It's enormous. It's a huge value. And so as soon as we can start talking that language and we have the tools in place and the people in place to do it, I really think we're gonna turn into a value center instead of a cost center.
Yeah, I love conversations when we pivot. We see the optimism, because I'm sure that there isn't a listener who's engaged right now who's not thinking that they want to be more impactful, that they want to build credibility based on demonstrable impact rather than how any particular stakeholder feels about what was delivered for them. But you mentioned tools there. What types of tools are you seeing right now, or perhaps are being prototyped, that you think could have the biggest impact today on L&D?
I have all kinds of feelings and opinions here. I mean, I think probably the most exciting thing happening today is really around the agentic tools that are coming into play. I'm thinking very specifically about Claude Code and what it can do. And, what it's done for us is, this time last year, we were doing these very big open-ended business simulations that are powered by AI, kind of infinite practice machines, AI coaching, all the kind of interactive stuff that you can do with AI right now. And the timeline that I quoted to get to something we could get our hands on was somewhere between 3 and 6 months, right? Claude Code made a big release in December, and we've been creating scaffolding in that for some time so that we can work faster. We're now at a place where one of our designers can pick up Claude Code, and in this kind of scaffolding system, they can create a prototype in 4 hours, deployed to the web. And I mean, that speed up is unthinkable. And I mean, from our perspective, the modalities of the future just haven't been designed yet, right? We don't have the patterns. We don't have the routines. We don't know what they look like yet. So it's a time of kind of wild experimentation, and it has to be. And the faster we can run those iteration cycles, I think the faster we're going to find that future. So that's a big thing. I think that what we're seeing in the roadmap of companies like Anthropic suggests huge changes coming. I mean, they leaked Claude Code source code last night, so people have been reverse engineering the roadmap. Today, if every L&D employee had the Anthropic kind of ecosystem at their disposal, it would 10x what they're doing immediately. So I think the impact of those tools just today are undersold in a lot of ways, and underutilized by businesses. Going into the future, I mean, the stuff that I'm seeing that's really exciting me are these infinite practice engines, and just the level of fidelity and, alignment with business, and the level of measurement you can get out of solutions like that. I mean, when you take somebody and you put them in an interactive open-ended simulation, you are creating data that is the same as observed performance or very close to observed performance. You can have an AI looking, or a large language model looking at that performance, rating it very reliably against a rubric. That's the kind of thing that would have taken, a big ethnographic study in the past, and you would have gotten some tiny portion of the audience. Now you're getting it by default as people are interacting with the system that you've deployed. And that combination of interactive practice that's going to feel very real and the data that comes out of that and the way you can create a virtuous cycle between those two things, that's what I'm most excited about. And that's why I think that, we are going to see a world in which the kind of current mode that is courses, curricula, static stuff is just going to slowly lose share to this interactive stuff. And that's kind of why I think that we're going to make the best possible static content that we've ever made exactly at the moment that nobody wants it anymore.
And there's another facet to this related to the market in general and those companies that are providing technology tools, task-driven platforms today. I was chatting earlier this week with a friend who's a CEO of a company, not a huge company, $25 million revenue. Person's a serial entrepreneur and very much an innovator and embracer of new technologies, has been for decades. He pulled up on his screen and he showed me, it wasn't really a learning application, but it's a learning company that he runs, but he's passionate about all sorts of things. And he basically created this tool that was a enabler of a CRM that essentially made CRMs irrelevant. And it was able to pattern match the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. So Brandon knows somebody, I know that same person, you know that person, I can get an introduction, you can analyze your pipeline. And he said to me, I developed this in 3 weeks and I've used 1 billion tokens in Claude code to do it. And I thought, wow, 1 billion tokens. Well, Brandon, what's 1 billion tokens? $10,000?
It's a good one.
I mean, it's not a tremendous amount of money that was invested. And this tool, when I looked at it, I thought this could make organizations like HubSpot irrelevant. And HubSpot is a big SaaS software CRM platform. And it wasn't
that's huge.
There's this race to become the best mousetrap out there, embracing AI and building these technologies. And I know a lot of close friends that I've grown up in this industry with who I wish all the best and nothing but success to, but I just don't know where it's going to end up. And what we're doing is sort of native outside of any one platform. And we've created an ecosystem of things that live behind our curtain. And, my friend's example of what he did in the sales CRM relationship management space, it's hard for me to get my head around, but it's incredibly exciting, right?
Yeah, it is really exciting, and and you can feel, and it's all right to feel anxious at the same time, because if these are challenging, if it's challenging long established and successful, infrastructure like HubSpot, who's to say that learning and development is safe here? But I suppose this is something we can thrash out here. And what it brings to mind now is, so what doesn't work or needs adapting when AI enters the picture? What I'm thinking are long-established processes in learning and development, the things that perhaps we build our teams around, whether that be ADDIE or Agile. What doesn't work anymore?
There's so much. It's almost impossible to even catalog it all. I mean, on the process side, just think about all the infrastructure, all the process, all the support required for static course review, right? It's enormous. And, again, you're producing a course in 2 hours. Do you need all that infrastructure? You think a little bit further down the road, how much of what we do is administering an LMS? Is there going to be an LMS in the future? I mean, I don't know. Is there, we're probably not going to have courses. We're probably not going to have curricula as an organizing concept. AI is probably going to be the interface. So that means the interfaces that the LMS provides us maybe are going to be a lot less important to us. What does that whole administrative service do in the future. And I mean, you just going from the sort of premise that a lot of what we do is organized around the static course and the static curriculum. Everything we have today that's supporting those, the rollout, the creation of, the management of, the maintenance of, which is most of L&D, it's just not going to be needed.
Yeah, I think the agile versus ADDIE age-old debate, it's definitely not ADDIE in the traditional sense, but it's not agile either, right? It's both of those things together combined, but it's just once you train the large language model du jour on both of those things, it's done. I mean, it'll just operate in that regard, right? And those that prompt the best, I'm not even talking about people using Claude Code. They prompt well because they do it in an agile way, right? Agile is a series of sprints with a series of reviews. I'm not a great prompter by any means. Brandon is one of the best I've ever seen. In the early days, if you treated it like Google, you got Google-like output, which was a whole bunch of stuff that you had to sort through. But if you treated it like a conversation with someone who knew what they were doing and you iterated, things got better and better and better. Well, that's an agile process. It just happens every 30 seconds versus every 2 weeks, right? So these things are all there. They're embedded. They're becoming part of the fabric and the DNA of how we use AI. But we don't stop and say, what stage of ADDIE am I in and do I need to apply it? It's just there. It's in ether.
The other thing is that, I mean, the whole, what we're managing is going to be very different, I guess, is the key thing, and why it's a little difficult to map that into what we have now. So, if a course is created effectively instantaneously and, processes are adjusted so that approvals can happen as they should quickly and so forth, you're talking about a 1-day project. Is that a project? And when you go further into the future and you think, okay, it's all going to be ephemeral content. It's going to be in the moment coaching. It's going to be in the moment sims and so forth. What are you even creating at that point, right? You're honing, you're tweaking, you're adjusting over time, but the project that you're running is really probably something more like an analysis and revision process on outcome. And so trying to figure out like how that maps into either waterfall or agile is very, very difficult because it's something much bigger than that. It's more like an organizational operations approach as opposed to something that's an individual work package, because individual work packages are just going to be trivial to produce. And, so it makes it really, really difficult to think about what model someone will use when we're really talking about kind of an apples and oranges comparison, what we do today versus what we'll probably be doing in 5 years from now.
More like grapes and watermelons.
There you go.
One of the things that strikes me there is, we were talking about ADDIE and Agile, which I think pre-AI, so pre-2022, I think was Agile fix some of the deficiencies in ADDIE in the ability to quickly deploy because you spent more time on understanding what the problem was, the ability to iterate rather than something being more static. So speed was the real differentiator. And it almost seems to me that one of the advancements of this with AI now is going to be in listening and understanding to what the actual problems are, listening rather than being alerted or being requested for some help, listening to understand what the critical points of failure are to point resources in the right direction, which could certainly address many of the deficiencies around learning and development not being able to measure the impact and then therefore being more performance focused. Is this how you're seeing this happening in, with L&D or perhaps business or performance data, reading the organization to alert L&D? And if so, what's the potential there?
It's enormous. I mean, this is a huge area of thought, and we're doing a lot of infra build out around this right now. And I love that you highlighted kind of failure modes and detecting those, because I do think that's going to be very central. I do think that analytical skill set is going to become much more important in L&D. I do think AI is going to perform a lot of work that helps prop that function up. What we've noticed when we go into, our clients, like say a mining company, we work with this huge mining company, and they have reams and reams and reams of near miss reports that they generate every day. Right. It is a flat tire in the Pilbara region or something, everything gets written up. That just sits in piles. Nobody looks at it. Right. How much intelligence is in that material? Common patterns, you could do root cause analysis. I mean, you can get to the mistake patterns repeating across audiences and geographies. And that's all incredibly important. AI can do that root cause analysis. It can hoover up all that information. And it can dashboard it for you. It can say, look, here's an emerging pattern. Here's what I think we should do about it. Do you want to do this thing about it? Here's what I think the return is. And we have tests running where we're seeing it work. So it's definitely not sci-fi. And I do think that's going to be really huge. When you think about the other component of that being, these kind of infinite practice engines where people are in there actually practicing and we're observing their performance. Now we have that performance data coming in from where it used to be siloed and we didn't have enough people to look at it. You can now correlate, right? So training becomes a lot more predictive of what's going to happen in the future because we're going to be able to tie what's happening in training to what we see in those kind of more experiential data reports that are piling up everywhere. I mean, call centers, reams and reams of data, customer service has, complaints from from customers coming in. There's so much of this data out there. It would take a team bigger than the whole L&D team today just to go through it. And, AI is just going to be able to do that 24/7. So I think that is enormous. Exactly what the human role is going to be in that is a bit of a question mark still, because AI does a really great job. You're going to need human oversight. How much, that's the big question mark. Is this going to be one data analyst looking at dashboard? Is this going to be a big team kind of tuning the algorithm behind the scenes to make sure it's all really firing at maximum potential?
Interesting. Now, here's a blue sky question for you. If you had license to redesign a corporate L&D function from scratch today to be fit for purpose for today or tomorrow, what would it look like and how would it operate?
Wow. The big one.
Question.
I'm afraid we've already scared the audience so much.
For anybody who's still here.
No, but in all seriousness, we've never had a time to be more optimistic and excited. And frankly, it's easy to get eyeballs on LinkedIn by predicting Armageddon and doom and gloom, but it truly is one of the most exciting times if you're willing to embrace the change, which can be a scary concept and thought. I think if I had a blank canvas, I would really start with that linkage to the business. And, I'm a serial consultant. I have been for decades, right? And I've always asked two main questions that starts every potential client conversation, which is, what's the problem you're trying to solve? How are you going to know when you solved it, right? Which is the linkage to the business, like what metrics, what performance, what need do we have? And how are we going to measure it and be able to evidence it? So the investment that we made, we can show how to return on it. And that's the most basic consulting principle there is. But to me, that basic principle will last for time immemorial. And that's the basis at which I would build an entire L&D organization around is how do you become part of the business? And I've got another good friend was a CLO and still very proud in the space. And he's running around reporting there won't be an L&D organization. I don't think we're going to go that far, but his point is it's going to be so infused and integrated into the business and tied into what the business is doing that it won't feel like this separate standalone thing. And that's what I would build. I would build this that's so integrated and woven into the business that you don't think about, well, now I'm talking to a learning and development person. You're talking about that person that's going to help you enable the performance that you need out of the humans and the technology.
And I sort of think about it from the experience space and, build out from kind of more the experience side of learning. So, I mean, if I got to just wave a wand and create the L&D department of the future, it would start with making sure that every learner has a very capable sort of AI tutor coach partnered up, and that everything's worked out so that the experience of that is wonderful and people actually like the personality and want to interact with it. I would give that coach the ability to spin up in the moment, learn by doing simulations so that it could actually incorporate that into coaching. I would connect that coach into the kind of relevant data streams so it could create the organizational model, the learner model, the goal model, all those various models it's going to need. So it needs to have Microsoft Graph access. It can see the emails. It can do all that stuff. And then, on the other side, creating that kind of sensing engine that looks across all the experience data coming in, makes good kind of pattern matching and root cause analyses and makes good recommendations about that, and just shorten the path between that sensing engine and the coach being able to implement, the recommendations that fall out of that engine. I would build my entire department, my entire approach around those three kind of core components, and making sure that those are propped up and that they're designed in the way that they should be designed, and that they're able to be operated, again, to just maximum impact.
Love it. And as a final question, if you were advising the listener today on what decisions they need to start making in the short to midterm to avoid being left behind, but also to capitalize on the opportunity in front of us, what would you advise them?
I can take first stab at this. I think the key thing in this, I've been saying it consistently for 3 years, start experimenting. So get yourself a playground that has access to a lot of tools, figure out whatever you have to do internally to make that safe, but get people asking themselves the question, what do I not believe AI can do? And have them try to get AI to do it. And after 5 rounds of that, where there isn't a thing they can think of that AI can't handle when they really work at it, you see the mindset shift, and you see the AI adoption just go through the roof. And I think that's it. Put hands on tool, get access to as many of them as you possibly can, create a safe playground, and start doing experiments that are trying to get somewhere you don't think you can get today.
Brilliant. Tom?
That's exactly where I was going. The thing I would add to that is, don't presume what you're doing is even good, because there's somebody out there who's doing it much better, much more sophisticated. And what I mean by that is, be proud of what you're doing and embrace it, but listen and learn. And, don't let your hubris get in the way of your learning, right? And ask your peers, ask the people who, forget your title, your status, your tenure, right? There's no, I know younger generations in the workforce that haven't adopted it, and I know people who have, and it kind of breaks all the demographic stereotypes, right? People are passionate, and it's almost like I've even met some of them, even on our own team, who are almost closet passionate about it. We ask the question like, hey, who wants to help with this? And all of a sudden they're like, well, look what I've been doing in my personal life. And you're like, why didn't you say something? You're like, you've got this nailed, right? So just, there's so much to learn, and none of us have all the answers. And I think we're a community of people that are learning and development. And there's this great opportunity to learn from each other and share. And there's no competitive advantage or differentiator at this point. So I think we all just need to be completely transparent and share all we can.
I love it. Thank you. This has been really enlightening, if not mind-blowing at times. But all that's left for me to say is Brandon and Tom, thank you very much for being guests on the Learning and Development Podcast.
Awesome. Thanks, David.
Yeah, the pleasure was all ours, Dave, as always.